Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the workshop on I.D.E.A.S method of futuristic thinking approach. So before we begin this workshop, I just wanted you to go through the design of the workshop. The agenda for today's workshop will be, number one, we will be talking about the introduction of the facilitators. That's me and Triyuth. Number two, we will be talking about why do we need I.D.E.A.S as a cognitive process, a new process. Number three, we will be taking you through the I.D.E.A.S method one by one, stepwise. Then my colleague Triyuth will take you through this process with Miro app, and then we will show you some examples that are our experiences from previous workshops that we've held here in Bangkok. Okay, so something about the facilitators, about us. So my name is Manjiri Kunte, and this is my colleague, Triyuth Promsiri. We come from Bangkok, Thailand.
Hello, pleasure everyone. Hello.
So I'll be explaining you the I.D.E.A.S process, and then Triyuth will take you through the Miro app for the process. Okay, so let's get going. Now, the first question is, why do we need another cognitive process? As you are already aware, there are many cognitive processes which lead an entrepreneur towards new venture ideas or business idea creation, right? So after a review of these pre-existing currently available cognitive processes, for example, alertness, prospective thinking, or design thinking, we observe that these cognitive processes focus or begin with problems, right? However, the method that we proposed, I.D.E.A.S, is a cognitive process which doesn't begin with a problem. It begins with issues, okay, and takes you through the same process to finally business idea generation. Interestingly, there is a difference between problem and an issue. A problem is something which has very limited negative perception to it, but an issue is something that represents possibilities because it might be good for someone and bad for someone. So that's why our process, I.D.E.A.S process, is known as non-problem based idea generation method. Okay, so an idea generation method that doesn't begin with a problem. It begins with issues in the center. I'll explain you the I.D.E.A.S process in details now. So what is I.D.E.A.S method? This slide here coming up shows you the 5 stages of the I.D.E.A.S method. I, identifying issues. D, developing timeline. E, examining values. A, analyzing stakeholders. And S, sensing possibilities. So there are 5 stages, 5 steps in this whole I.D.E.A.S process. Triyuth and I presented these 5 steps last year at ISPIM Florence, as Anna said before. And based on our further research after the last year's conference, we realized that these 5 stages are not actually linear. And novice entrepreneurs don't tend to use them one after the other the same way. And so over a period of time, we revised our model slightly. So as you can see now, this is the revised model where stages 2, 3, 4 are parallel to each other. So that stage 1 is the input to 2, 3, 4, and the output of 2, 3, 4 is stage number 5 here. So as you can see in this revised model, there are still 5 stages. Stage number 1, which is identification of an issue, leads to finally sensing possibilities as the final stage of I.D.E.A.S process. However, stage 2, 3, 4, which were previously arranged one after the other, are now revised. In the revised model, they are arranged parallelly, 2, 3, 4. Let me take you through each of these steps in details now. So stage number 1 of I.D.E.A.S process. Stage 1 is it begins with a current issue which exists now and which might affect the demand and supply for a certain industry in the market. So when we are talking about stage 1, we are talking about the current issue which affects demand and supply in a certain industry currently. Normally, an entrepreneur ends up using a model like PESTEL to come up with effects of current issue in any industry. One example of a current issue is COVID-19, which affects demand and supply for many industries like tourism, logistics, labor, fashion, etc. So as you can see, the first stage of this I.D.E.A.S process is all about identifying a current issue which affects demand and supply for a certain industry in some way. Based on the issue identified in the first stage of the process and the specific industry that issue relates to, the second stage of I.D.E.A.S process is all about drawing timeline. So based on the available data, the facts, the trends, an entrepreneur develops a timeline of the issue for his or her own chosen industry to map the extent of unpredictability. So the objective of this stage is to map out the kind of things that might happen in the future based on the things that have happened in the past. So an entrepreneur looks at the trends, the timeline of certain issue and its effects, and tries to map out what might happen, what might change. For example, if I take fashion as an industry which is affected because of COVID, I might think about fashion trends or changes in the sales channels as one of those, let's say, trends which is affected. The third stage of I.D.E.A.S method is exact opposite of the second stage. So whereas as the second stage, entrepreneurs try to foresee what the trend is, what the timeline is, and try to forecast how this particular change might evolve in the future. At third stage, entrepreneurs examine what values for that chosen industry will never change. So whereas the objective of second stage is to find out what might change, objective of third stage is to see what will never change. So objective of third stage is to rule out the predictable component. This stage involves ruling out some beliefs, common attitudes that will not change. For example, low prices, the need for low prices, high delivery speed in a specific industry will never change, just like Jeff Bezos said about retail industry. People will always need vast selection, low price, and fast delivery. One important thing to note at this stage, third stage, is that values are very person dependent. So different entrepreneurs might value different things within the same industry. Next, we reach the stage number 4 for I.D.E.A.S process. This stage involves thinking about or analysis of all the possible stakeholders in a specific industry which you have chosen since the first stage, and thinking about the impact a particular change might make on them. So at this stage, an entrepreneur will look at the stakeholders and analyze which stakeholders will get affected positively or negatively. Okay, now although both these types of effects, positive and negative, are important to map, you will see later how those stakeholders which get affected negatively will be the ones which prove helpful towards the final idea generation. One important thing to note at this stage is also that along with thinking about analyzing all the possible stakeholders, we should also, an entrepreneur must also categorize all stakeholders based on the level of impact. So low, medium, high, or negative, positive impact on their own. Okay. Last stage, the fifth stage of I.D.E.A.S process is all about sensing possibilities. So until now, we've seen stage number 1, where we identified issues, stage number 2, where we drew out a timeline, stage number 3, where we thought about the values which will never change, and stage number 4, where we analyzed all the possible stakeholders to find out which people will get affected positively and negatively. Stage number 5, sensing possibilities, is the last stage of I.D.E.A.S method, and it brings together all the previous stages in an attempt to create a business idea by looking at the trends, the unchanged values, and the negatively affected stakeholders. This can be called as the most important stage of this whole process, okay? Because this leads us to the completion of the entire I.D.E.A.S process. These are the 5 stages that I explained to you. My colleague Triyuth will lead you through the Miro app now to depict how these stages can be seen with Miro, and you can experience these 5 stages by yourself. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, thank you so much, Manjiri. Okay, I'm turning this into the Miro app now. Just give me a second. Okay, just excuse me a second. I'm turning the Miro app on. Okay. Okay, hopefully that the Miro app does happening in front of you now, right? Okay, that's right. All right. Okay, just would like to just explain to you in a nutshell first. So here, basically, we always do this in physical format, which means offline class. But somehow with the grateful situation of COVID-19, so we have to transform everything into the online format. So we developed a template via Miro app. So for those of you who don't know, Miro is basically the virtual online collaboration tool, which is allowed you to do some kind of like idea generation method, just kind of like the same thing that you always do in class, okay? All right, so basically here, what I would like to do is basically I will spend about 30 minutes sharp to just give you a demo. Somehow we used to do some kind of a test run before that we asked participants to come in and do the interaction live in Miro app. And we found it a little bit hard to control the class. So let's say that we also would like to have a very high engagement, but with the limitation of time, what we can do here is basically we can just do the interaction via the chat box. So whatever that you do or you have a comment, I can also take the comments from the chat box and I will basically can just add into the Miro app by myself. Okay, so let's do that. But anyway, good news is that I also just built the template of the Miro app for all of you who are interested to get your hands dirty. So I will just basically share with you the link of the template on the right side of the chat box. So you can also thinking about if you want to, just experience getting your hands dirty and so on, you can just get into the template as well. Okay, I don't want to just take much of your time, so I just started to explain and navigate you through the process one by one. Okay, so in front of you here is just the same template or framework, which is Dr. Manjiri just explained. The template are consisted of 5 steps, started from step number 1. Sorry, here, step number 1, which is identifying issue here. This is step number 1. The results of step number 1 is feeding in, and it's actually the input of step number 2 here, which is drawing a timeline. It's the input of stage number 3, which is examining values. Also step number 4, analysis of stakeholders. And then we will basically use the results of stage number 2, 3, 4 in order to create the stage number 5. Okay, so this is how does it work. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I basically going to spend time about 5 minutes or 3, not more than like 3 or 5 minutes for each stage, and then you can experience how would we actually do this in reality. I mean, once when we have a workshop. Okay, so let's start with step number 1. Okay, so here what we do is basically we would like to identify the issue. Okay, and then we do that by just basically use a very simple, mind mapping. What if this is the real class, right? So you started with just like in the middle, started with issues. So issue is defined as anything, any situation which is going to affect the demand and supply side. Okay, and there are also another tools that you can also use for participants in order to come up with the idea generations of how to come up with changes, which is the acronym of PESTEL, which is stand for political change, environmental change, and technological change, and so on, right? So like, for example, in this case, when we're talking about issue here, and then what we do is that we started to think about the big change and its impact. For example, when there's, you can also think along, and then you can be a little bit engaging by just texting something. We can also just put it on the Miro to fulfill our framework. It's going to be fun. For example, in the case of COVID-19, right? You just have to think about how does it change the way we live? How does it change the way, we change in terms of the demand and supply? For example, here, there's a lot of things, right? You can think about the change in the way we work, also change in the way we interact with people, change in the school learning system, so many things. So what do you actually do within the workshop is basically you try to ask the participants in order to come up with many, many effects, which is derived from the change, as much as you can, right? So you just focus on the idea generation, just coming up with a lot of changes and issues, right? Aside of COVID-19, when you talk about technological change, there are so many things. For example, in this case, you can say that Libra, which is a new currency from Facebook, is basically a new technology, which is going to create a lot of changes as well. You can say that Libra can possibly change the way that we save money. right? Because you used to save money in the bank, but once when we have a new currency, probably it's going to change the way that we save the money as well. It's probably going to change the bank industry, right? There's so many things. Just one thing that I want to make a note. One good thing about using Miro is that you can also provide a citation live. Like for example, here I just post a link from original Facebook, Libra.org, right? I put it here, so you can also trace back to the original source as well. So it's kind of cool, a benefit that you can have from the online class. So now you get it, right? So that's example of the technological change. There are so many emerging technology changes as well, like virtual technology, blockchain, and AI. You can also think about environmental changes. For example, in Thailand, we have a serious case about the dust thing, which is called PM 2.5, that is becoming very crucial in the northern of Thailand, and it creates a lot of pollutions. These kind of things is actually slightly not the problem, but we call an issue or big changes that impact our lives. So we take it from there. Okay. So here, this is an example, right? Another one, which might become from the governmental changes. We call it political changes. There's a initiative called One Belt, One Road, which is a big road, which is going to connect it from China to Russia and just turn back to Asia. So that's probably going to lead to a lot of possibly changes in the future. For example, like the change in transportation line, new opportunity for exchange of goods in the new ways, and so many things, right? So here, if you think about this, right, now you can understand the way that we run the workshop is basically to branch out and to think about all the possible changes out there in the world. Okay, so that's the result that you get. But just specifically for this workshop, we don't have time to just have all of you to just come up with a lot of ideas. So we're going to focus, and then we just picked one thing for you, which is we will pick COVID-19 as a principle, as an issue, that this principle will be used in all stages from now on. Okay, so just want to make sure that you understand that within all the issues that we have created, now we picked one, right? The I.D.E.A.S method, you have to start with only one issue. You have to pick one single issue to bridge in order to just bridge through and create another ideas. So that's the goal. All right, so this is the result from step number 1. So now you got an issue about COVID-19. Let's move to step number 2. Okay. All right, so step number 2 here, we are basically trying to forecast the trends. It sounds a little bit impossible in order to predict the future, but if you have enough data, then slightly you can also forecast some coming trends, if you can see, right? So the goal of this stage is basically we would like to have 2 things. First, we would like to have the trend, which is saying that indicates something which is going to be decreased, right? So we represent that kind of trend in the form of the red post-it on the left, as you can see here. And the second thing is that we would like to see some positive trend, something which is going to be increasing or in demand, which is we're going to represent or indicate in the green color post-it. All right, so red and green, so that's simple, okay? And yellow represent the fact. Okay, so what do we do here? Let's try to imagine in the case of COVID-19, okay? Let's dive in. So here, for example, in the case of COVID-19, we represent into 2 axes on the X axis and Y axis, right? Now we gather the data from the internet sources. So here, if you look at the X axis, right? Started from 15th of Jan when the situation of COVID-19 started to get more severe. The spread is going to be more kind of like a pandemic, right? Now, we actually developed this data up until May 24th. Actually, we can also use the current data, but we developed this presentation before that. So X is the timeline, while Y-axis represents the number of infectious, okay? So what we can learn from here is actually something that you can actually learn from the graph, right? If you look at the green line here, you can see that the number of infectious cases in the United States is actually going up exponentially, and it seems to be going up again, right? While if you compare to other countries, for example, like Switzerland, right, it's kind of like slightly increasing, but it's not, it's moving up, but it's not moving up at the exponential rate as compared to states. While you can also see the third group, commonality, like Japan and South Korea. that even though that they have some kind of like significant number of infectious, but it started to get saturated. While the last group like Thailand here, the number it's pretty low, right? The trend was kind of like quite stable. So you can see here. Now, if you use this data in order to see some trends, you can categorize it into the different groups, right? You can say that there are some kind of like the country like Africa and Oceania that even the number it's small, but it's keep moving up. And there are the country like North America that it's kind of like there's a lot of infectious case and still going on. While the China, it's the first to begin with, but it started to get saturated and followed up by Asia. So what you need to do here is to take all the data, and the first thing is that you have to write down the fact. What are the things that you actually can predict from this? You write down as much as you can into the yellow post-it here, right? So once what we're saying about the fact, right? Fact lies into the, interpreter anyway, but actually we can also saying something about the fact from the data that we have, right? So we can say that the first fact is that traveling over infectious countries is prohibited. That's a fact. Nobody can be allowed to travel on and off from now on for a while. So that's a fact, right? You can say there'll be a less demand for overseas tourism. Yeah, that's a fact because nobody can travel. That's a fact, right? So number of the demand should be lower. You can say that America is still in the crucial stage for COVID-19. That's a fact. South America is still in the crucial stage and it's rising. Everything this is about the fact, okay? So there's nothing which is, we use our idea just yet. We just represent the fact from the data. But the most important thing that we do after this is basically we need to come up with a trend. We started to use some forecasting about what will be happening after we see this data. And now this is kind of like we also use your imagination plus with the data that we have, and then we can see whether something is going to be going down or something which is going to be going up. Now let's look at, this is my own forecasting trends, okay? Which is represented in red color, right? So I think that this is a negative trend. US overseas tourism is going to be negative. Nobody would like to just go to sorry states for a while because of the spread of COVID-19. Overseas exchange students industry will be less demanded, right? Nobody can just fly and having an overseas education. All agent platform got effects like Agoda, Airbnb. Once when there's less demand for tourism, all the agent industry is also going to get affected, right? Even students cannot go to field trip, or you can say that the number of full-time jobs will be decreased massively because of the COVID-19 situation. So here, this is a trend which is indicated that something is going to be decreasing, right? Decreasing dramatically. This is what we forecast. And of course, maybe it's right or it's wrong, but it's based on the fact. Now let's look at the green color, right? So there's something which is probably going to be more in demand, or it's probably going to be increasing as well. So I forecast that the number of part-time jobs will be more in demand. Since there is people got laid off, people stay at home, maybe they're going to be more part-time job in demand, right? As inward to or opposite to another thing. I would say that the local education will be more in demand. Since people cannot just go and study abroad, so probably they can basically stay and study within the countries. So that's something which is just forecasted is going to be more, right? Or you can even say that the domestic tourism is going to be more popular, right? Because since people cannot go overseas, then domestic tourism is going to be more in demand. So see, this is kind of like something that is use your imagination in order to do the forecasting, whether something is going to be more or something is going to be less. So here, the results of the second stage is that you get the trend, right? Something which is going to be more decreasing, less, right, in demand, you represent in the red color, or something which is going to be more, you're representing in the green color. So this is two results that you get from the second stage. Okay, now we're moving on to the third stage. Here, as totally opposite to the second stage that we would like to forecast the trend, on the third stage, we would like to understand what are the value principles within some specific industry that will not change through time. So we do that because we only can be able to build a strategy on the stable things. If something just keep changing and tolerating, then you cannot just make anything which is making a forecast on anything which is unstable. So let's look at this tool. The tool that we deploy is that we use the tool which is called the 30 value pyramid. Why do we do this? The reason is that if we ask someone in order to come up with what are the things which will not just change through time, so it's going to be a very awkward questions, right? People cannot just think about that easily. So people probably need some stimulus, like a flashcard. So in the idea generation workshop, we use 30 flashcards that we deploy from the value pyramid concept. I'll just show you how to do it, right? For example, here, let's try to think about the example of the tourist industry. Even though with the case of COVID-19, you can just start to think about what will not change within the tourist industry. Start to think about it, right? So people can say that people want to travel anyway. So that's probably can be something that you say. Or you say that people always need to find ways to reduce their anxiety because only working and stay at home is probably not like something that normal people do. They need to find ways to reduce anxiety anyway. So that's probably it's something that will never change, right? Or you say that people need to reduce the risk of infections because if you travel a lot, right, maybe that's not the case. People still think or also aware about their health as well. So here are all those kind of things that you have to think and try to answer whether what are the things that will not change within the specific industry, right? You can even say that hotels still need to find ways to make money anyway. So that can be the fact that will not change. So once when you do this in the workshop, the way that you do is that you try to select some values to the participants and ask them to come up with an idea. Whether do they agree that this value will remain within the industry or not? For example, right? By the way, I should explain that there are basically 4 concepts of values, started from functional value, which is kind of like a physical value that started from the bottom of the pyramid, that people would like to do things to get things done, and moving up to emotional value and ends up with social impact value. So the way that you do that in the workshop is basically you try to give some specific value to the audience and ask them whether do you agree or you think that this value is still going to remain with your industry or not. Like for example, I just trying to ask to come up with some value. For example, like save times. If you give the save times value flashcard to participants, and then you ask whether do you think that the saving times is a value that will stay within the tourist industry or not, that people would like to just get from point A to point B at the most effective time. If that is a value that will stay, then you select this flashcard and then you use it as an input of other stages. All right, so here, this is the result that we get from the 3rd stage. Basically, we get something that we call the unchanged value, right? So we need to keep that in mind, and then we will just give it as an input on the 5th stage. I think it's going to be okay. I have on my plan about 12 minutes left to run this demo. It should be okay. Okay, so now we arrive to the 4th stage, which is the analysis of the stakeholders. Okay, so here we would like to understand whether the issue of the COVID-19, as an example, will possibly get a effects on some certain people. Okay, and we would like to see the level of impact that they will get, whether in terms of the both negative side or the positive side as well, right? So here, the way that you do that in the workshop is to start with the a simple mind mapping. Like you kind of ask people to start to think about the stakeholders, all stakeholders within the industry. For example, here's a F&B industry. We can also start to think about the stakeholders within our industry, right? I mean, in the tourist industry, as an example that I'm using now. So after you do that, you try to branch out and then you write down the negative effects that they have. For example, in Thailand here, right? Small local restaurants, they have a lot of negative effects because of the COVID-19. For example, people this is kind of like a mom and pop shop that they are not very sophisticated on technology, so they cannot, easily know how to convert themselves into using all those kind of line platform and things like that. So you can say that people cannot equip with the new technology like mobile payment. That's negative. Lost good staff because they cannot pay. That's a negative effect, right? Or you can say that they cannot cope with the margin from the international platform like Line, Grab, and those kind of things. So all those kind of things are negative effects of this particular stakeholder. So you just make a note with the post-it. Let's look at some other stakeholders, right? There's also some number of people who got laid off because of the situation in the tourist industry, right? So you're saying that X employees in the tourist industry also got effects. They lost their jobs, and they're also feeling not ready to switch themselves into the new industry if they have to, right? So that's a negative effect. So as an entrepreneurs, what we do here is that we would like to sense all those kind of negative effects, because that's a chance that we can fix it, right? So this is the mindset. Now let's look at some example of other stakeholders. For example, like a restaurant supplier. Restaurant supplier, since the hotel cannot sell, also they do not need to order new stocks, right? For restaurant suppliers, they also face a problem about the dead stocks as well, because they cannot supply goods to hotel. So this is a problem that it's very severe, right? Because once you have a dead stocks, which means that you are producing loss, if you cannot just sell it, you basically cannot just get the cash back. And if the stocks are kind of like expired, right, then you lost everything, no money and no everything. So this is some kind of like a big concern that we can have, that we can think of. And you can just think of many things, right? MICE or industry, for example, which is stand for meeting, incentive, conventional, and exhibition. They cannot host the event. So this is kind of like a very big downfall for them. So you make a note here again. I just want to give you the last example here, that, for example, like travel agent, right? Like platform, Agoda, Airbnb, also face a lot of negativity because there's less suppliers, right? People do not want to list their home or their houses because they cannot get customers anyway. So here you also list as a negative effects, right? So there are so many things which is negative. Now the next thing that we do is basically we prioritizing the impact. And we do that by basically using this metrics, which is we call impact versus effects metrics. So on the left side is a level of impact. Started from the bottom, which is low impact, on the medium side impact, and also the top one, which is high impact. And on the X or bar, we kind of categorize the type of effects. On the left side is a negative effect, and the neutral effect, which is kind of like so-so, and positive effect on the right side, right? So here, what you do is basically you pick all those kind of effect from the idea generation that you just had from the previous session before, and then you drag and drop, and then you put it into the metrics just like this, right? Like for example, here I just make some kind of example that I picked some example right here, which is I concerned that this is a very big and crucial impact, that there are a lot of dead stock from the hotels. The impact is very high because they're producing loss, and also is very negative. So here it's kind of like a prioritized that you have to fix. MICE industry cannot host the event. That's a big thing because it's probably the one and only thing that they can do. And also you can think about the medium effect as well, like luxury hotel cannot lower the price. So that's kind of like something which is a negative effect. So you categorize and you put in the metrics. Okay, so let's zoom out and sum up this stage, right? So at this stage, what you get is basically you get the effects, right? And what we would like to have is basically we would like to fix the big effects. So here, this is the area, high impact with negative effects. This is the area of the impacts or effects that you would like to pick and use it on the final stage. Okay. Now, let's look at your big picture and see the last stage again. As I told you before that the outputs of the second, the third, and fourth stage serve as input of the fifth stage, right? So now you take the trend, you take the unchanged value, and you take the effect of stakeholders as a combination in order to come up with the futuristic ideas on the last stage. And this is the final one that we're gonna do. And I'll just show you how, okay. Okay, right? So there's, basically there is an idea which is called pattern recognition theory, that it's saying that entrepreneurs always use a different mindset or use different categories in their mind in order to connect with the dots that it seems to be disconnected from the beginning. And this is the thing that we will do, right? Because if something is there, it's not new. Only new things comes from the things that we do not see. But this technique provides entrepreneurs in order to come up with a more systematic platform in order to come up with ideas, right? And we do that by making simple 3 boxes that seems to be disconnected from the beginning. Okay, so the first box is called predicted changes. This is the outcome from the second stage. So what we do is basically you can take out all the posits or anything which is, forecast both negative trend or positive trend. It can be the red color or green color post-it, it's fine. You just place it here. This is the outcome from stage number 2. Now the second box is called unchanged values. So now you take any kind of a value that you would like to try. So just thinking that this is the idea generation method, right? It seems to be disconnected from the beginning, but you can try to just put it into the box, right? This is number 2. And the third thing is the stakeholders pain and gain. For example, in this case, I just use the concept of dead stock from hotels, right? So now you can see, right? Seems to be 3 things that seems to be disconnected. But if you try to look and then you see it, actually you can come up with a very good ideas to solve the problems, right? First thing you see that there's a number of people that they'll be more concerned about their spending. So that's a trend. As an entrepreneur, you look at this trend will going up. People will be more concerned about their spending. And you look at the second thing in terms of the value, but anyway, people will basically continue to save their money because the economic bias, right? But you look at the last stakeholders analysis and you found that actually there is a people who got some big pain here, that they got a dead stock from the hotel, right? So what you do is basically you try to come up with the ideas, right, to solve this guy problem while providing some unchanged value to customers on the right time with the predicted changes trend. Right, so now you can see that people, this is an example of one of the good ideas from my participants, right? They say that they can come up with a shop that can sell expired stocks in the cheaper price, right? Because they're saying that actually this guy, the dead stock from hotels, have a lot of supply, right? And they have a lot of problems. And also people need to save the money, and economic will be bad for a while. So that's the idea that you can start it to come up with a shop that can sell expired stocks as an example, right? So here, this is some example. I will just basically use one another example, and then I will just provide, reserve the last time for just Q&A session. I believe that we're gonna have about 10 up to 15 minutes, okay? And all of this, I'll just share you the link so you can access and you can just look at it later. But because of time-wise, I don't want to ruin your time, okay? And this is some kind of like example of a lot of little bit, futuristic thinking idea as compared to the previous one. For example, these guys, they're saying that people will tend to be more familiarized with mobile technology because the COVID allows people to stay at home for a while. So they have to use a lot of mobile technology and doing something that they've never done. So they forecasted the trend of people would be more familiarized with mobile technology will be going up, right? And they're saying that, but there's some trend that's saying that people will be more cautious about interact with people because they are afraid that you'll be infected, by contaminating and just interact with people, right? So here there are, 2 trends, which is they put on the predicted changes. But they saying that, somehow people have to save time. People would like to simplify things, and people don't want to, people want to avoid hassles, which means that people don't want to basically go on the direction that it has a lot of choices, right? They would like to make sure and get from point A to the point B effectively. So that's kind of like avoid hassles value. And the last one is that from the stakeholders pain and gain, they found out that the local street food, they cannot deliver foods, and customers feel concerned to go out and eat at a public space, right? So this is some kind of problem that need to be resolved, right? Some kind of like problem that in high demand out there, solving the effects. So what they do here is that they try to connect between solving the pain point by providing something which is unchanged values at the right time, right? With the right predicted changes. So they come up with an idea it's called automated food supply through a driverless vehicle platform, saying that all the foods can just supply food through this driverless vehicle, and people can use mobile technology in order to order food at home, etc. Now you can have a debatable discussion saying that this is too advanced or too futuristic based. Yes and no. That depends on timing, right? That depends on how you forecast the trend. That depend on what is the effects of the stakeholders' pain and gain that you can have. Okay, so I just would like to get you to the outlook again. So here, this is 5 stages of the futuristic thinking. Now, I just would like to finish my presentation by I'll just exit my role and share with you the last topic, which is the results and feedback from the participants after we developed this and tested this for actually a couple of years. This is the 5th one, which is I already gave you a demo. This is the last one, which is cases. So it is not because of the COVID-19 that's allowed me to develop this, but before this, I also used my role in order to give this kind of demo with the students, and then just saying that, I mean, they love it. This technique or this method can be used with the online teaching platform perfectly. Students can use a lot of sources. Students can interact from many places around the world, and this is kind of like a proof that I've done this a couple of times, and then it's very good. For all of you, if you would like to use this and share with the students, I think this is a very good alternative, right? This is the product of my students. Actually, I really admire them that they came up with a very good idea, right? And this is some validation and outcome. Just in short, what I've learned is that students always saying that this method allow them to think more broadly, right? Do not force them to think about just only problems. That's the first thing. Another thing is that they kind of like saying that this method allows them to be able to think about the future in a more critical way, like not dreaming about something that it's kind of like elusive and it's not coming. But this method allows them to be a systematic thinker, but also at the same time can be creative as well. All right, I think that's it. I'll just open more time for a Q&A session. And if you really would like to know more about this, don't hesitate to drop us an email below here.
Thank you, Triyuth. We have about 10 minutes for the questions and answers. Yes?
Hello. Yes?
Hello, Triyuth. Thank you very much for the presentation. A quick question for you. I may have missed the point on the definition of the timing on the second stage. It didn't come to me quick, really how the time was established for the exercise. Is it something that you recommend the teams to do 2 scenarios, both short-term scenario, long-term scenario, or just long-term scenario on the timing definition stage 2?
Okay, what we basically define by timing is a level of impact. Like if the impact of the problem is very serious, and the effect is a lot. So it's something which is that you need to solve right now. Like the urgency is more. That's what we mean by the timing.
So it should be clearly defined in stage 2 what the horizon is. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
If I may ask a question, since we are interested in teaching and coaching innovation as a teaching and coaching tool, can you speak a little bit of the kind of a teaching guidelines? How long does it take to really use the tool in class, maybe? Or you've provided feedback, but okay, if I'm a teacher and I want to use this, where it is available, and will you help me to learn how to use it a little bit from this perspective, please?
Okay, Manjiri, you want to do it, or? Okay, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. Okay, so There are basically three, let's say that there are kind of like three types that you can do it. First one is about something that it's going very intensive, and we always do it on the like physical face-to-face format. So it's probably take about 2 days. So the things that you do is basically you separate these 5 stages into the like different hours. So basically one stages approximately use about up to 3 hours. For example, like in the timeline stage, you break students into groups, right? And they try to come up with their issues or their ideas. So they're always using some kind of like different technology and method and come up with ideas. They do the research. So this is kind of like 3 hours. And basically they continue to the different stages intensively, right? So this is the first one that you can do. Another way that you can do, which is I tried, is to use Miro. The way that you use Miro is basically you can also doing everything online. And it's kind of like if it's a class format, you can do one class per one stage. Like what I did for my class was basically 5 weeks of I.D.E.A.S, right? I mean, for one class specifically that I asked the students to just come and build the, all the ideas based on the issues that they come up with. So just to give an answer, like if it's a workshop based, it's kind of like 2 days intensively. But if it's a class based, it's basically to just break the stages into one stage per class. So these students or participants can have more time to understand and come up with ideas.
Thank you. That also gives an idea how to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions coming up in the chat. There was one asking if you mentioned the flashcards. Marcus is asking if you could share them.
The flashcard, it's always used on the third stage, which X meaning external enablers, right? Like I just explained, so when you ask someone to think about what will not change in the specific industries, sometimes it's a little bit hard to think about something that's very abstract, right? So you do that by just giving a card, which is a value to the participants and trying to ask them to come up with that. For example, with the tourist industry, if I ask you about what will not change, you might not be able to think about anything. But suddenly, okay, within 5 minutes, I just give you one flashcard saying that, for example, this is the value that your team received. It's about like, for example, variety, right? Variety can be one value of the functional value. So you also have to think about what will not change within the industry. You might say that perhaps customers always would like to have more choices. That's why there's still the existence of I.D.E.A. or other platforms as well. Yeah, but basically that's the idea. So you use flashcards as a stimulus for any particular people in order to come up with ideas. If they can think about that slowly, so it's okay. But if they cannot think about it, it's a good idea to just give the flashcard and get the participants to think about it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes for each flashcard.
But is that any kind of standard cards which you use, or did you prepare something customized?
Yes, so we prepared the 30 cards like we just built into the stage number 3. So that's what we always use, 30 value pyramid card.
Ah, okay. And in the template which you're going to share, will the participants be able to see actually those cards?
Yeah, I'm sharing it now. So they can just get into Miro app and all of you can see.
Okay. There was also a question about the companies, but I see that Manjiri has already answered it in the chat. Yeah, there's also a very good question. Based on your experience using the method, would you make any changes in future sessions?
We are probably gonna just make it into the human interaction format, not kind of like online format like this. There's also some certain limitations. We will learn from it, and we will just recently updated the version, just like my colleagues say. Not so sure for now what we can improve, but we will continuously improve. Maybe the value pyramid, we can also think about other flashcards from other theories. That would be nice.
And then,
So just to expand on what Them just suggested, one of the things that we noticed was within the value pyramid, it looks like we can strike with we can connect very well with the functional level values, but when it comes to emotional values, it was the connection between the predictability and the things that won't change is not so strong. So I mean, with the various workshops that we have done until now, probably we would want to explore more with the emotional level, emotional values level in the future.
there are still two questions which demand some attention. One is mentioning Libra, which you included. Yes. So the question stands, maybe I missed something, but just wondering why you included Libra as both unsustainable and unethical example.
That's debatable, but somehow, like we just explained, that we're just focusing on the change. Any external changes can be both good and bad, right? Which is checking all the demand and supply side. We just put it into the model. We do not consider like the intention of this model is basically to develop the non-problem based. So the outcome is that we would like to see all the possibilities out there. So just to give an answer, because Libra, it's a big change. Whether it's unethical, something we don't know just yet. But basically, that's a big change, which is going to definitely, from our point, we forecast that it's going to affect the industry. So that's why we picked it.
And the last question, which is perfectly fitting into our timeline, I think it will be the last one also for the session. In both examples in stage 4, you focused on stakeholder pains. Do you find these are more frequently chosen and used instead of gains?
Yes. So there are kind of like two lines at this point for the pain side and entrepreneurs, right? If you found a pain point which has a very high impact, there's a tendency and opportunity for you that can solve it. So that's why as an entrepreneur, first thing you focus on the pain side. But on another way, right? I mean, you focus on the gain side, there's no needed for you to come up with new ideas. For the gain side, basically you just ride the wave. For example, like the Zoom, right? Here, they got from the stakeholder analysis, right? From the COVID-19, they got a lot of gain side basically because all people converted to just use Zoom online. So that's why their stock is increasing. So from this point of view as an entrepreneur, you do not have to come up with new ideas, but basically you inject the money, or basically you invest in the money which is coming up with the trends. So it's kind of like two ways of thinking, right? The one with the negative side, you need to solve it to come up with ideas. But the one on the good side, basically you invest on it because the idea has already existed and is on demand.
Thanks a lot for introducing this method. I think there is a lot of interest around it. Thank you all for participation, for your wonderful questions.